welcome to the 220th edition of the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast. In Nashville, Tennessee, I'm the professor, Matt Perkins. And a stop fade across the Harpeth River from me here in the Music City, it's our own offensive coordinator and the host of the Believe in Georgia Dogs Football Podcast, the coach, Corey Burton.
What's up, Matt? Yes, that was a great plug. We just put in the stop fade concept. We call it snap. So that's the signals we snap like that. We just put that in, and it's going to be a key cog to our quick passing game. And also, yes, catch me on the Believe in Georgia Dogs podcast. We actually, we're going to talk about some other sports too throughout the football offseason, but it's going to be centered around Georgia football. But I'm going to shed some light on some other sports as well. But we had an episode come out today, Matt. We've got a special edition coming out tomorrow, and then, of course, we run on a Monday, Thursday schedule here at the Believe in Georgia Dogs podcast. And
Little Hunker Down Monday, right?
Little Hunker Down Monday, and we got an extra we got a Hunker Down Tuesday tomorrow. So make sure you hunker down and listen. Check me out on iTunes, and Matt, this is the place where we join forces and talk about your podcast, the Believe in Vandy podcast, the Believe in Vanderbilt football podcast.
Well, I'll get to that after we introduce the third amigo in the second city, a man who has become well acquainted with his realtor. It's our intrepid blogger from Big Ten Accounting, Josh Cook.
Yeah, doing the meeting tomorrow as we record this on Monday night. Looking to get out of the rental game and purchase a condo. Moving on up.
There you go. I thought Matt was going to introduce you as a man who just put down his euro, but
I felt like it was a hell of a euro.
I bet.
Josh, there are two kinds of people in this world, in the words of Michael Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Those who rent and those who own condos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
You're about to be the second.
For people not acquainted with Chicago, like, it's not your, like, divorced dad's condo. For instance, did an open house on Lakeshore Drive right across from the park, so a little bit nicer than that.
Could be worse.
Could be.
Well, guys, we are
could
all...
be living in St. Louis. Could be living in Missouri.
Or Gainesville, Florida.
Or anywhere in Florida right now.
That's true.
Well, let's take that natural transition from the state of bleep that is Florida to the state of bleep that is the college football schedule this season. In the past week, the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 have all announced they will be going to a conference-only schedule. For those of you who are excited to see Ohio State versus Oregon, Wisconsin versus Notre Dame at Lambeau Field, or others, sorry, you are SOL this season. They will have to be rescheduled. It is, obviously, COVID is, from day to day, we have no idea what's going to happen.
It's the number one recruit in the state of bleep.
COVID is, yes, the number one recruit in the state of bleep and the state of Florida, which are one and the same. Josh, though, first of all, assuming, that's a big assumption right now, that we do have a football season this fall and we do move to a conference-only scheduling, how do you think that is going to affect some of these bigger schools?
Good question. First of all, the announcement, just before talking about any specifics, are a stopgap measure. It delays the season a couple extra weeks for most teams and most conferences, which gives a little bit of a bubble, I guess, of some extra time to see if anything sorts out. Personally, I'm of the mindset that there's about a 0% chance we get a college football season this year. But that's pessimistic, and that's not very good podcasting. So I'll answer your question. Who does this impact the most? I think it impacts the Pac-12 teams because the committee hasn't really enjoyed what they do in conference. And a lot of the teams, Stanford and USC, for instance, schedule Notre Dame. And that right there is a marquee out-of-conference game. So it hurts the Pac-12. It hurts Notre Dame because as of now they have 6 ACC teams, and that's kind of in flux. You mentioned they lost the Wisconsin game. So what in the world is Notre Dame's schedule going to be? So they're the big loser. And then there's also a few pockets of teams. For instance, we've obviously put the show now on hold because there's not going to be this game. But for Coach's podcast on Georgia, I prepped about the Virginia-Georgia game. There's a lot of those games like Georgia where they are a national title contender, and getting Virginia to open the season would be a good test. Not an impossible test, not even necessarily a super challenging test, but a nice kind of like baseline to see where the team is at, what do they need to do to improve on. And now suddenly they're going to have to do that litmus test with a conference game. Say they get upset, they're down one in the SEC race, they might not be able to recover from that.
Well, Georgia opens up their conference slate. If they don't completely blow up the schedules, they open up the conference slate with Alabama.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of an issue.
And Georgia had Virginia and East Tennessee State as games to get ready for Alabama. So when you open the season with Alabama, I presume that they're going to blow up the schedules and redo them because there's a lot of variables that go into it.
I would assume so as well. And one of the other things you need to take in consideration, though, Coach, you and I were talking about this on the phone over the weekend. There are a lot of these traditional matchups that are played every year. Georgia versus Georgia Tech. You know, these
first time since 1924.
First time since 1924 that there is a potential that they will not play each other. Coach, I think there was another one we were talking about that goes back even further.
Yeah, Clemson, South Carolina, 1909.
You know, the fact that Clemson, South Carolina might not play for the first time in 110 years because of this is pretty mind-blowing. The fact that they got through 2 world wars still playing it every year, and, you know, because of COVID, you know, it looks like they're not going to. I mean, this is really, Josh, just sort of messing with a lot of the basic foundations that we have of college football.
Yeah, but I just want to say that all said and done, it's going to be a minor footnote. I don't know the amount of times that Iowa and Minnesota have played. Obviously, that's a Big Ten game, so it's not at risk for that. But I don't think the average Clemson, South Carolina fan really cares how long ago their rivalry lasted.
Just look at the Iron Bowl, Josh.
Besides, none of those games are ever going to overshadow the one where they had the bench-clearing brawl and we got to see Lou Holtz's spectacular end of his career.
Exactly. Yes, that was a very devastating brawl. But no, just, I mean...
Was that the Tommy Bowden era of Clemson, I believe?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Just to back up your point, Josh, as it being a footnote, I mean, the Iron Bowl went 40 years. They had a 40-year gap in between, I think, like the 1920s, and they didn't resume it until like 1950. So, and nobody really talks about that, or that doesn't really seem to be a point of contention, or nobody really cares about that point. So to say that, I mean, it's an interesting note now, but I think in 5 years they're not going to even remember, oh, right, we didn't play each other that year, so we broke the streak. So I don't think it matters all that much. It's just one of those things that you're right now in the moment. It's surreal because, again, 110 years is, you know, it's quite a long time, I've heard. So it's just one of those things.
I'll tell you who lucked out with all this. Oregon. They don't have
to play. They don't have Ohio State?
No, they don't have North Dakota State.
I see what you did there.
That's good. I like that.
That was great. But, I mean, honestly...
Well, that was going to be one of the great games, the opening weekend of the fall, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I think one of the...
Let's talk actually a little bit more, though, about not just FCS, but also Group of Five. You know, either of you guys. Corey, I guess I'll direct this at you. Group of Five schools make a lot of their money by being... You know, by going to Power 5 stadiums and being paid hefty sums of money to play and typically lose, unless you're Georgia State playing against Tennessee. And so I think that is going to fundamentally change how a lot of these Group of Five programs operate this season.
Well, they're just going to have to get creative with their budgets. There's going to have to be some donors, some creative donations. They're going to have to find ways to create revenue. They're going to have to. I think you're going to see Group of Five more prevalent on TV. They're going to have to get used to playing Tuesday Night Football so they can put those ads on the bleachers like they do at Premier League games and stuff like that. So the point I was going to make prior to that question, Matt, is I think the conference-only schedule stuff is going to help college football actually play in the summer or give it the best chance to play in the summer because you're going to have these conferences that have uniform policies, and it's going to be easier to manipulate the schedules if you're not dealing conference to conference. If you're just dealing with your own conference, you can shuffle things around and it'd be no problem. So, but as far as the Group of Five, I mean, I think the biggest blow to the Group of Five, I think, is going to be Hawaii because they've got so much travel. They're not going to be able. I mean, I think their budget's going to hurt. I think you're going to see a lot of schools in the Group of Five do what Stanford did by cutting, I think, 11 sports.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, Stanford had something like 28 or 29 varsity sports, where most schools have like 16. So
yeah.
Stanford cutting 11 sports isn't really I don't think is a very good analogy in this case, just because Stanford was already an outlier in the number of varsity sports that they offered.
Yeah, but they're going to still cut sports.
Oh yeah, they're still going to cut sports. I mean, we've seen this all over the map, not just at Stanford, but schools left and right announcing that they are cutting sports.
UConn cut 4 sports, I think.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was football.
No one noticed.
To piggyback off Coach, I think the Group of Five is going to have to get creative. They always have to be creative. That's why there's the Maction games in the middle of the week. But it would certainly
Sunbelt Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it would help college sports in the long run if the Power 5 teams honored at least some of their commitment. Like, there's no reason, I don't know if they faced either one, but, like, there's no reason for Ole Miss and Mississippi State not to, like, give a little bit of some breathing room to Southern Miss. They're all part of the same university system. Like, this is the time where neighbors need to help neighbors, and just, Iowa State, for instance, playing UNI, to just cut them off and go, yep, get lost, sorry. It's like, what? You're all part of the same feeder system. You all the same border regions. Like, just, yeah, that's my personal feeling. But when you mentioned the Group of Five, Matt, I was thinking about what the American Conference commissioner said, which I think was a dose of reality. When the conferences were going to these conference-only schedules, some coaches were like, well, even if we can't play here in the fall, like, we could do spring football. We can make it work. And the commissioner was basically like, no, if we're not playing in the fall, we're not going to be playing at all this year, because as soon as you have spring football, that totally destroys the following season. Also, you would have football players potentially doing almost, 25 games, depending on if they make it to a bowl, a conference title
30,
game. Yeah.
30 games. I mean, LSU played 15 games last year.
You could potentially play 30 games in a span of even probably less than that.
Yeah.
Probably like 10 months. Mm-hmm. It's just asinine. So I was appreciative of the AAC commissioner giving some hard truths. And the hard truth is there's going to be a state that eventually has the first domino fall. I think it's going to be California. California already reshut everything down today. If school's not back in California, and that includes no open campuses, no student athletes on campuses, how is the Pac-12 going to have a conference slate without USC, UCLA, Stanford, and Cal, assuming private schools also follow the public school mandate?
Yeah, and at the same time, how is the Mountain West going to have a season without San Diego State, Fresno State, and San Jose State?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, San Jose State, I mean, they could do without them. But, the same thing goes. And, one of the things that we talked about last time we were together was how the differing reactions from state to state might really upend this. And I think we're going to see something like that when we have California, who is, with Governor Gavin Newsom, who is not at all afraid to shut things down, versus you look at Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, who's saying, or Ron DeSantis in Florida, who's saying, yeah, just, leave it all open, and, leave the weak to die in the streets, basically, not exactly in that many words, but, and so especially when you have conferences that have schools across so many different states that are so different politically. I'm looking at something like, obviously, like the Big Ten covers a large swath of very different politically leaning states. So does the Pac-12. A place like Utah, which is a much more conservative state than a place like California or Washington State, you're going to have very different reactions, and also very different amounts of people who are testing positive for COVID and the percentages and things like that. And it's such a cluster. And I also don't see the NCAA as a governing body doing any leading here whatsoever. It's been left up to the commissioners and the leagues themselves and the conferences themselves, much like the reaction has been left up to the governors and has not been taken care of at the executive branch level.
Well, the thing is, regardless of a state's makeup politically, even some very, very, very red parts of this country closed schools.
Oh, yeah.
And I said it on one of our earliest shows since the pandemic started. Universities' budgets really don't get as much sports money as people think. That sports money goes to the sports half of the school, and they're kind of self-insulated. The academic part of the school gets so much money from tuition and donors and all that stuff. The optics of a college campus having a few deaths is going to be awful. If a college campus goes all the way and has 10 to 30 deaths, that school can kind of write off their next few freshman classes because no one's going to want to go there.
Right. I'll take UGA just as the student body. I think at one point, this was probably a couple of weeks ago now, I think at one point they had 150 cases just like that. Once they started kind of allowing students back to campus and back to Athens. And so, you're going to see, Georgia's a very, very red state, and they were probably one of the ones that opened the soonest. I think everyone's behind Florida opening wise, but
I'm not sure Florida even ever closed anything.
Yeah, you're probably right.
They closed the beaches. They were closed for a hot minute, not due to COVID, but due to an alligator infestation.
Yes, Florida man was caught doing meth off an alligator, so they shut down the state for a couple of days. But I actually Googled that. No, but it's there's so many variables. We talked about, students virtually. Well, the thought is that maybe you could isolate the football team, have them take virtual classes, and then treat the football center as its own home base, isolation chamber, and do it that way, because they're still taking classes, but they're on campus and they're sequestered with each other. I know, and I keep using UJ as an example, but I know that there's a hotel on campus that the team usually stays at for fall camp when they're being, they're obviously every year sequestered for a couple of weeks at fall camp. So they could stay there if need be, if they needed to create their own little bubble. So, I think the smart thing to do if you wanted college football would kind of follow that bubble model. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I have a couple issues with that. First of all, you can't have a bubble on a college campus because they're inevitably going to be running into other non-football players, even if they're taking online classes. Like just going from wherever they are staying, whether it's a hotel or their dorms, to the practice facility, you're going to run into other people. Also, they're freaking 18 to 23-year-olds. Like, I don't know if you remember, Corey, Josh, you and I were together when we were that age.
I don't remember much. Is that bad?
Well, I think that's the point.
True.
I think that's the point that, I mean, we've already seen it with LSU and Clemson and some of these schools coming back. Like, even if they're told to sequester and be quarantined and, and not leave their rooms and dorms, they're going to.
Yeah.
I mean, they're 18 to 24-year-olds. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't say it's, I cannot imagine anyone with any sort of rational thought saying, yeah, I have 115, young men between 18 and 24, and I expect all of them to sit dutifully in their room for 24 hours a day, or except for when they are at practice. Like, it's not going to happen.
No, I just thought I saw that brought up.
I don't see anything of that happening. Plus, the optics of doing something like that, when you're saying that, okay, we're going to make all these special accommodations for the football players, but football players and all student athletes are not supposed to be any different than other students on campus. You're going to cause a whole nother uproar just with that by giving them all of that extra special treatment. What about the kids who are there on a music scholarship? What about the kids who are there as a history major or whatever, And if you're not going to be able to afford to provide them with the same kind of opportunities, then you're going to get some real issues.
Josh is speechless.
No, I mean, I just agree with everything that has been said. I was hanging out with my dad over the weekend. He asked if I had seen this story from our hometown, Iowa City. I was like, no, what's up? And he said that they opened up their summer school. It was the first day of class of summer school, and they made it literally one day, and then so many kids tested positive, they shut it down. The fact of the matter is schools don't have good ways of sanitizing stuff between use. They don't have air ventilation. They don't have any of that stuff. And then you add in a football team where, I mean, how do you social distance and maintain like the weight room? Like,
oh God.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you social distance on the on the sled?
Yeah.
How do you social distance during the Oklahoma drill? Even though I know most schools have canceled that by now.
Well, listen to this. I'll take it down to the high school level and tell you guys about some of the literature. I use literature loosely that we've gotten for COVID procedures. We were told that the governing body for the Tennessee secondary sports high schools, TSSAA. I think it's the Tennessee Secondary School Athletic Association. They had a special meeting so that they could tell us that they were going to have a special meeting to decide on options for fall sports. And then at that second special meeting, they decided they were, instead of just sending a press release saying, yeah, we're going to delay the vote, they just had this special meeting and sat there, and then all of a sudden, after 45 minutes, decided they were going to delay the vote. And so they sent out this letter, and I thought it was like, okay, well, maybe they came up with a plan. Okay, here we go. We got something concrete. And it's basically just saying, yeah, you're not allowed to make contact. You need a social distance. You can basically do conditioning. And that was like the extent of it. There was zero guidance on how we should do that stuff. And so we're preparing as if we're going to have a season, which, I mean, it's all we can do, because if they tell us we can go, we're going to go. We don't want to be unprepared. But, it's very hard because we're having to do things like try to social distance. We had, like, any other year we would have had 20 kids show up and we'd have been fine social distancing. This year we had 51 show up. So I love the fact that we had 51 show up, but it makes it nearly impossible to social distance. So we've gotten zero guidance from anyone in that regard. I think schools finally came around, at least here in Nashville, came around and said we're going to start the year virtual and go till Labor Day, which was the right call. The surrounding counties are not going virtual, so we'll get to see kind of firsthand here in Nashville. Matt, you and I will get to see firsthand of how Rutherford's going to look. I think Rutherford's going to get decimated. How Cheatham's going to look, how Sumner's going to look, how Wilson's
Rutherford
going to look.
for those of you who do not live in Middle Tennessee, Rutherford is where Murfreesboro is, and Rutherford, right? That's where Murfreesboro is, right?
Yeah, it
Rutherford
is.
County.
Yeah,
Everyone there, that all a lot of the COVID deniers, people who think it's a hoax and stuff like that, are like cheering the mayor of Murfreesboro, who's saying like everything's open, and
yeah.
And
So, Matt,
it's going to come
geography
back
lesson.
and bite them in the butt so hard.
A little geography lesson about Rutherford County and kind of where it's located. I don't know if you've ever seen the heat maps for Nashville as far as like where all the cases are.
Yeah,
Okay.
I look at that stuff every day.
Yeah, so the southeastern portion, Antioch, is where most of the hotspots are, right?
Yep.
Well, you know where Rutherford County starts?
Antioch, like right
Antioch.
next to it's right over next to Antioch. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think all of those people stay on the Davidson County side?
No.
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 They do
so
not.
many of them
They spill
work
into
in
Laverne.
Murfreesboro. Well, and also
Or they work
on
in-
top of that, like at the school I work at here in Nashville, like half my students live in Murfreesboro.
Yeah,
Like half my students are commuting from Murfreesboro every day, and so they are. My school, the technical school that I teach at, has been back in person for over a month now.
it's a densely populated town.
Yeah.
They're going to get like Wilson County is a little bit more spread out. They may be okay. They're probably going to come through relatively unscathed. Sumner County, Hendersonville is going to get hit hard because of their like anybody within the close proximity of Davidson County, or anybody that's touching Davidson County, should have went all virtual. If you ask me, but they didn't ask me. So
Nope. They did not ask you. They did not ask me. They did not ask Josh.
Yeah, what I find most interesting, I'm sure, Coach, you've been on meetings like this. Matt, you said you're back in person, so you might not have had the
weeks now, yeah.
Yeah, you might not have had the joys of these meetings, but I love the absolute absurd Kubaki theater of having Zoom meetings so we can socially distance to explain how we are going to safely have school in the fall. And it's like,
Oh yeah.
that's awesome.
it's like,
Oh yeah, like when Betsy DeVos comes on and says that all schools have to go back in person while she is doing a Zoom meeting from her house with a bookcase behind her. She's the Secretary of Education with a bookcase behind her that has no books on it.
yeah, I mean, we're about a month away from when we're supposed to have classes, and really, state of Illinois doesn't seem to know what they're doing. Chicago Public Schools doesn't seem like they know what they're doing, and my little
Atlanta Public Schools is going all virtual.
and my little private school, we don't know what we're doing.
Los Angeles announced today that they're going full virtual for the first semester.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if we follow suit here before too long. State of Illinois had a couple days in a row where we had 1,000 new cases, first time since like March, April that we hit those levels. So
Tennessee had 3,300 today new cases.
yeah,
So
How many were in Davidson?
What's that?
How many were in Davidson?
A lot.
well,
A lot of them. I mean, because like the cases are in the state of Tennessee are basically local. For the most part, are in Davidson, Shelby, and Knox.
yesterday the state of Illinois dipped back under 1,000 to 950 something. And I told Dad, I was like, well, that's because less people got tested because they were all in church getting each other sick.
Well, that would be more true in Tennessee than it is in Illinois. Let's face it. There are a lot more people going to church in Tennessee than there are.
Well, rural southern Illinois.
You don't need, Matt, you don't need to go too far south where your beautiful wife grew up to find Confederate flags.
No, this is very, very true. Not saying that she had one in her house growing up, because she did not.
No, she's in suburban Chicago, but she's in a very.
But she's in the southern suburbs.
Yeah.
Not too far. All right. Well, let's talk about a little bit happier of a topic, at least for Coach. Coach, you now have not one but two transfer quarterbacks who are immediately eligible. With the ruling that came down today that former USC quarterback, former five-star recruit, number one high school quarterback in the country, I believe, in his class, where he's at least top three, JT Daniels is immediately eligible. And the reason he's immediately eligible is because, I believe they said, because he's a quarterback. And that is so. Coach,
that is
what does that
accurate.
mean for your Dogs? Assuming that we have a season this fall, is he going to unseat Jamie Newman, who has been the presumed starter ever since he transferred as a grad transfer coming over from Wake Forest? Or is JT gonna come in and start slinging the rock around and make a push for the starting gig?
I think JT's going to make things interesting.
He's a very different quarterback. They are two extraordinarily different quarterbacks, not just in their build, but just in, I think, the way that they see the game.
Yeah, I think ultimately this season he's not going to unseat Jamie Newman, because I think the intelligence level of where Jamie Newman is versus where JT Daniels is, just experience and intelligence that you gain from experience. I think Newman has the upper hand. I think Newman's been in the system a little bit, not too much longer, but a little bit longer than JT has been. And I think Newman's just more healthy than JT Daniels. I mean, JT Daniels has been battling injuries and still recovering, so we don't know where he is physically. The thought of JT Daniels was, I think he was going to hope to compete this year, but I think he was more so gearing up to have that breakout year next season, and maybe try to get two. But I think he was just going to be thankful with injuries to get next year and try to make some noise. But I think if you asked Daniels, I think he was surprised that he even got eligible. I don't think he expected to be eligible, and I think this probably caught him off guard. Well, not really off guard, because that's not the right word, but I think he's thankful. I think he's happy about it, and I think he'll compete. I think he'll make it interesting, and I think I think it's going to be a good camp storyline. But I think ultimately he will not unseat Jamie Newman. Jamie Newman's good, and he put that on display at the Elite 11 as a camp counselor. They always have the counselor competition, and Justin Fields was there as a counselor, and that kind of reopened the wound for Georgia fans there watching him compete. But they still haven't shut up about Justin Fields. But so I think it's very good though, because Newman is a runner. He's more of a runner than Daniels is, so he's got more of a chance to take a beating in the SEC. And if we're going all conference schedule, that definitely lends some possible playing time for JT Daniels in injury relief. So it's very valuable to have another starter, even if he serves as a backup. I think he will play some meaningful snaps. I just don't think he's going to be a full-time starter.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it is. I mean, I'm not surprised that he was ruled to be eligible immediately, because he is a quarterback, and apparently that's just what the NCAA does. Says, oh, most people have to sit out, but if you're a quarterback, you don't have to sit out. That's just the way it is. But yeah. I still like James. I still, if you look at their overall quarterbacking play. So last season, Jamie Newman was like a top 20 quarterback in the country in QBR. JT Daniels, the last time he played meaningful games, 2018, wasn't even in the top 100. He struggled which I think that would have been his sophomore year, or maybe that was his true freshman year. I can't quite remember. But he just does not nearly have the same pocket presence, awareness, just overall ability to read the game and not make mistakes. But one of the things, Coach, though, that I think that people are overlooking is the fact that Georgia has a whole bunch of new receivers this year too. And you can make a case, because what I've heard people saying is that, like, oh, Jamie Newman, like, he's going to be so good because the receivers he had at Wake Forest weren't any good. That's a lie. Sage Surratt's a great receiver. Nolan Gruel's a good receiver. They've got some good receivers there.
Yeah. His two worst games, though, they were out. They were injured.
Yeah, and that's the point. But
Yeah.
at Georgia's bringing in a whole new set of receivers too, and it's going to take a little while for them to get that chemistry.
Oh yeah, I mean, like any new situation, doesn't matter if you're walking into a situation like the Atlanta Falcons where you have Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. Any new quarterback's going to have to develop that chemistry. But you have a guy, George Pickens, who's more talented than well over half the receivers in the country.
Half the receivers in the country? Are you kidding me? Like then 95% of the receivers in the country. That guy's a physical freak.
Yeah, I was being a little modest, but yes,
very modest. There's a reason he was a high 4-star, 5-star coming out of high school. Like
exactly. But what comes in behind him is a whole lot of. There's some talented guys, but we just don't know anything about them because the guys on the roster were either like Kyrus Jackson was injured all year. Dominique Blaylock was starting to come on, and then he tore his ACL. Matt Landers was a flop, and then everybody else were a whole lot of nothing burgers. And then you have three really extremely talented freshmen that are coming in that are going to look to for playing time. And then some of it was scheme related. Like there was no, we talked about this, right around the time that they were hiring and firing coaches. When James Coley left, one of the biggest things about Coley and his system and the way he called the games was very by the play. He lived and died on the play sheet, which as a good coordinator, the play sheet is just supposed to be there in case you need it. It's like that fire extinguisher that sits on the wall with the glass, break if needed, and most coordinators usually don't break that glass.
Yeah, Coach, I've sat in the booth with you when you're calling games and offensive. I don't think you looked at your play sheet once.
No, there were times where I wasn't even holding it. There was times it was probably in my back pocket.
No, most of the time I was charting plays for you and I was holding it.
Yeah, you were trying to see exactly what.
I was like, what the hell did he just call?
Yeah, I was like, here, it's probably somewhere on there. I think the point of all that is you got to have a feel of the game, and he didn't have a feel of the game, so the scheme kind of put the receivers at a disadvantage. I think some too. That's got to go into it. That's not the end all be all, but that's got to go into it. Then some promising things coming into this year is those guys got some experience. You hope that Kyrus Jackson, and Dominique Blaylock, who are two really talented receivers that you don't know much about, hopefully they can step up. We have Marcus Rosemy, who is, I think, the highest rated of the bunch, coming in from St. Thomas Aquinas. Then you have Jermaine Burton, who flipped over from LSU. And then, those two guys, I think, are in the running for a good amount of significant playing time. Then you got James Cook, who, when he's not playing running back, he can moonlight as a slot receiver because Todd Monken has no qualms going 10 personnel, as you know from Oklahoma State. And even when he was at Southern Miss, they were top 20 in all offensive categories, which is unheard of at the time at Southern Miss because when he took over, he was taking over for an 0-12 program. So for them to be good at anything was impressive. So his acumen speaks for itself, so there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. So there's a lot of excitement. You just don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be George Pickens and then everybody else. Well, you also get transfer tight end Trey McKitty from Florida State. Don't know much about him. Maybe he works out, maybe he doesn't. You roll the dice. He's an experienced veteran who's played Power 5 football. So you don't know what you're going to get with him. But if you get half of what he did at Florida State, that's going to be valuable. You bring in a guy that looks like LeBron James at tight end in the recruiting class, Darnell Washington from Las Vegas. So you got a lot of weapons. You just don't know anything about them. The only people you know about are James Cook and George Pickens and Zeus, Zamir White.
Yes, I'm excited to see Zeus as the feature back this year because coming out of high school, he was a pretty special player. But before we get going, though,
I just wanted to say real quick, Matt, you you hit kind of my argument perfectly about JT Daniels versus Newman. Daniels highly regarded 5-star quarterback, but in his true freshman season, he had an under 60% completion rate, 2,600 yards, 6.9 yards per attempt, 14 touchdowns, 10 interceptions on a team that went 5-7. Never easy to be a first-year starter, but he also had a lot of hype surrounding him. I think it's safe to say he didn't fully live up to it. On the other hand, Jamie Newman, he was the backup to start 2018, but played the last 4 games of the season. Ended up getting stats in 6 games, so in a half a season in 2018. He was right at 60% passing, 1,000 yards, 7.7 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions than last year as the starter in all 12 games. Just a hair over 60% completion percentage, almost 2,900 yards, 8 yards per attempt, 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. When their careers are all said and done, JT Daniels may very well pan out as living up to all that 5-star hype and be the better college player. But in terms of where he's at in not having played for a whole year, this offseason being so disrupted, the fact that it was a pretty devastating ACL injury.
Yeah, I think that's the bigger thing than anything else.
Yeah, I think
is it coming off of that injury.
Yeah, I think Newman starts this year, and maybe next year it gets revisited. But I'm with what you said, Matt and Coach.
Well,
you were
Newman's done after this year. Newman's a one and done.
Yeah, I mean Newman's a grad transfer. It's his last season of eligibility.
Yeah.
Daniels has 2 years left, right?
Yeah, and so another point that we're missing. Well, you kind of touched on it, but not only did he not play football for a full year, but since the pandemic happened, and since he left USC, and kind of both those things combined, up until now, when he was just allowed back on campus. When I say now, I mean like within the last few weeks, that he was just allowed on a campus. He hasn't got any medical grade treatment, I'm sure, on his knee and his rehab. It's so much different at home. Like, he probably hasn't had the same level of rehab on his knee that he normally would if he was on a college campus. Oh, yeah,
because you don't have the trainers there with you, putting you through the exercises, putting you through your paces, and being able to, and watch your progress through that kind of stuff.
Exactly. No one is disciplined enough to do that kind of rigorous rehab on their own. No one. No matter how. Or
even if you have something close to the discipline to do the rehab on your own, without having someone there to supervise you doing so, they're going to pick up on things like, oh, well, actually, maybe you think you're doing okay, but I'm noticing you don't have the amount of stability that you should have at this point. So we need to change this and do X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C. And
so you're saying there's nobody there to evaluate their progress.
Exactly.
So, and that's a big factor. Like, you don't know how. Like when live bullets are flying around him, you have the number 1 defense in the country going up against you in a controlled scrimmage. You don't know how your leg's going to hold up because you're not going to be able to sit there and think about your leg. You're trying to figure out how in the hell am I going to get rid of this ball before Azeez Ojulari puts me in the turf.
Or God forbid, if it stands right now, your opening game against Alabama.
Oh yeah, that. You just don't know how your leg's going to respond. The first time he's going to throw a few dirt balls early on in scrimmages because he's not going to know when he plants and drives off that leg or drives into that leg, I forget which leg it is, but depending on which leg it is, he's either driving into it or driving off of it. Either way, there's some weight shifting going on, and you don't know how well it's going to hold up, and you don't know how well you can trust it. So you're either going to sail a ball into the stratosphere, or you're gonna put
it right in the ground.
12 hop it. You're gonna 12 hop it to the receiver. So you just don't know. There's so many unknowns, and Newman is perfectly healthy. Newman's been working out with the team. He's been throwing. He's been doing things. He's been digesting the playbook and doing virtual walkthroughs with the guys. Because he's been here since January, so he's had some of that. Some of that interaction. He's had even some of that live interaction with Todd Monken. So he's a little bit ahead of the curve mentally. He's ahead of the curve physically because he was with Coach Sinclair before everything got shut down. So he got some training, and they were getting ready to start spring practice. So I think they got maybe 1 practice in before they shut it down. So he was able to get some form of work. So you got to think that gives him a leg up. Not saying Daniels can't come in and win the job, because he certainly can. It's just how's his leg going to respond, and how fast can he pick up on things, because he's certainly behind the 8 ball in both regards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we finish up, Josh, we need to check in with the Iowa Hawkeye football program because.
Oh, do we have to?
I mean, I feel like we owe them at least 30 seconds because last time we checked, you had fired your strength and conditioning coach. And then since then, we've had a couple former athletes come out and say, yeah, he's not the only problem.
Yeah, and the most notable player was Akram Wadley.
The very good tailback who played for them for a while.
The confusing thing right now for really all parties involved is yet again the player put a lot of it on Chris Doyle, who they got rid of, and the stuff about Kirk hasn't really teetered on, well, he treated me this way because I'm black. It was more, he's a hard-ass coach. And, I mean, Kirk's been doing this for 20 years, so he's stuck in his ways. Maybe he's an asshole, maybe he's a hard-ass, maybe he's all those things. Doesn't mean that you can do it nowadays. I mean, the famous example, Woody Hayes punched a kid. It got fired. Like, we've seen other coaches. No one tolerated Bobby Knight's behavior at the end. And not that Kirk is punching people or throwing chairs across the court, but we've seen this progression of hard asses aren't really around as much. They're kind of a dying breed. And the other thing that's very confusing, especially about Akram Wadley's comments, is he's saying this after he left and didn't get a pro contract. And so he's kind of angry at that standpoint. And the journalist did a really poor job. In fact, it was like a Facebook interview, so I don't even know if it was like a real journalist that did this. But whoever he was talking to didn't really push back on anything because, as a player, Wadley actively tried to get his brother recruited to Iowa. So if it was the worst, thing that ever happened to him and he said he would never do it again, go to Iowa, if he could have a do-over, he wouldn't go to Iowa. Why was he trying to get his brother into that same situation? So, I think Wadley needs to kind of help clarify his statements, help fans understand, help the university understand. But for every player that's come forward, it's been, well, Chris Doyle does this racist stuff, Brian Ferentz is an asshole, and Kirk Ferentz is a tough-as-nails coach who treated me badly. And that's, like, got to figure out. If Kirk is treating the white kids equally hard as he's treating the players of color, then it's a different discussion. Then it's, hey, Kirk, it's 2020. You're not on Fry's staff in the 70s anymore, where you get to, like, threaten a kid's meal plan, which was one of Wadley's complaints. That's a different conversation than if Kirk has a level of hard-assness to the black kids and then a different level for the white kids. Then it turns into, Kirk, what are you doing? Why do you have this racial blind spot? So the Iowa story is still in flux. We don't know what's going on. The university is still doing probably investigations. But I'm certainly glad that players are coming forward with their story. I think it helps in the long run to get as many accounts. And on the other scale, there's a former player of color, his name's eluding me right now, who after graduation, he actually became a police officer in the state of Wisconsin, I believe. And he came out saying, like, Kirk was the greatest thing that ever happened in his life. So the whole thing is a confused mess. I'm glad Chris Doyle was gotten rid of because that was the one constant in all the players' tales of what happened while they were suiting up for Iowa. The other stuff just is a mystery at this point.
So, Josh, do you believe that they should clean house? Do you believe that the truth is somewhere between Wadley and there's no problems? Or, what are your thoughts on the state of the program? Is it time to clean house? basically.
Well, I think, you know, Kirk's been there for 20-some years. Sometimes getting new blood is not the worst thing in the world to happen. There's a lot of great up-and-coming coaches in the FCS rank or at smaller schools. There's tons and tons of amazing coordinators out there. You look at Iowa's numbers offensively, and we're so far behind the times on that front. And Brian Ferentz, you talked about not having a feel for the game and needing to look at your play sheet all the time, Coach. I don't know if Brian Ferentz ever looks up from the thing.
I mean, it's a wonder that some of these coaches. One of my favorite pictures, Josh, not to derail you, but one of my favorite pictures. They made a meme out of it. It was Ben McAdoo when he was the head coach of the Giants. He has
the Cheesecake Factory menu in front of him.
He has 4 and they have 3 binder clips, 4 11 by 17 sheets
front and back
with 6-point font. And there's a picture of him just he's got it so close to his face, and he's struggling to flip him over and find what he wants.
Ken Niumatalolo's playbook is a Post-it that says triple option on it.
Mike Leach, in all seriousness, Mike Leach has a folded piece of paper that has, and that he just holds it in his hand. He doesn't ever look at it, but he just holds it in his hand.
But to get back to your question, Coach,
he probably draws pictures of pirates on there or something.
To get back to your question, I think, if the university chooses to clean house, I think that is certainly a fine way to go. Some of the heat that Brian Ferentz has taken, combined with his lackluster coaching, I think is plenty fine of a reason to cut ties with him.
Also nepotism.
Yeah. Now, it's a unique situation. If Kirk's, to avoid the allegation of nepotism, he's actually not the direct boss of Brian Ferentz. Brian was hired by the athletic director. So,
and I'm sure Kirk had nothing to do with that whatsoever.
Obviously, yeah. So theoretically, the AD could can Brian Ferentz. Now, does Kirk then go, well, you fired my son, I'm going to retire, and just call it that? Maybe. But like I was saying, if it turns out that Kirk is just this hard-ass old-school coach on everybody, it's going to be harder for the university anymore and clean house without a warning. I think he almost, at that point, has to get a warning type thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for us here tonight on the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast. Josh, any final words?
None for me, other than just keep wearing your mask. The whole point of it is you don't get other people sick.
Yeah, wear your mask so they can wear their helmets, and so we can all have college football.
Yes.
I saw a study or something the other day that said if we had all been wearing our masks this entire time, we would have reduced this whole thing by 80%, and we would have had football at the.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a reason that all of the sports teams in Western Europe are back to playing again. There's this reason that, South Korea has fewer cases in their entire epidemic than Florida had in one day.
Yeah, they were playing baseball in March, which is ridiculous.
KBO,
one last thing. Yeah, there you go. One last thing on a extremely lighter note. Congrats to Little Prime Time. He committed to FAU today.
Bit of a shocker there. He was a pretty highly regarded quarterback coming out of Texas, state of Texas, and he's going to FAU.
Yeah, Shedeur Sanders.
And I thought he was going to go to Louisville. Personally, I thought he was a lock for Louisville.
I did too, but maybe Prime wants him to play for Willie Taggart.
Why?
I don't know.
Why?
I maybe he knows something I don't. Maybe Willie is.
Prime also thinks that he should be like the head coach at every college football program, though. So I mean, I think the delusion of grandeur is present in both Primetime and Willie Taggart. So
yes,
I'll leave it at that.
True. So, also final note, check out the Believe in Georgia Dogs podcast, and while you're at it, check out the Believe in Vanderbilt football podcast with my man Matthew Perkins and
Zach Stacy.
There you go.
Commodore legend, graduated as the school's all-time leading rusher, leading leader in rushing touchdowns, leading pretty much every rushing category. And
I thought Jay Cutler led those categories.
In rushing? No.
Yeah. He was highly mobile. That's what I remember.
The only thing he was rushing to was a buffet.
And Kristen Cavallari, which he's not
anymore.
So, yes, that's it. You know, I got the I've had the privilege of listening to Matt and Zach on, I think, what are y'all, 3 episodes now?
4, yeah, something like that.
Something like that. I can't wait. I am waiting on the invitation. I guess it got lost in the mail.
Oh no, it'll be there. It'll be there once we start getting to our season previews, Coach. We're having you in. Josh, we're having you in. We're gonna talk a little ball.
Matt, is it kind of like when you say the check's in the mail and it never comes?
Pretty much.
Oh,
that's how I operate.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to do like a mega show with you and Zach, and I hope to have. I think that'll be fun, and. I hope both of our show. I hope we grow into the 2 mammoths of the Believe Network.
Well, we need to get Josh in on the third, as the third one.
Yes, Believe in Hawkeyes football.
Believe in the Hawks.
Believe in the Hawks.
It's not going to be called Believe in Brian Ferentz, because then the title would be a lie.
Be an oxymoron. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to call it a day. So, on behalf of our own offensive coordinator, the coach, Corey Burton, here in Nashville, Tennessee, and our intrepid blogger from Big Ten and Counting, Josh Cook, up there in Chicago, Illinois, this is the professor in the Music City saying so long and see you next time on the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast.
Wait, Matt, we have a caller. Caller, you're on line 1. Guys, this was a truly, tremendously awesome, outstanding show. I really enjoyed it. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I think it's going to reach millions and millions and millions and millions of people. I just wanted to say congratulations, and make sure you get your butts back in school. Thank you. Good night.